PHPSpec. Who of you have ever worked with PHPSpec? What? Okay, at least not only one, that's interesting. Not the thing I normally see. Mostly it's what is spec? What? No, it's, I think, it's, like I said, it's one of the tools nearly everybody that is developing should know at least a bit about to decide if it's useful for him or not. Something about me, I'm Nils. I do Magento for quite some time, mostly since late 2009. Right now I'm working for GastroHero. That's a dealer for professional kitchen equipment. There I'm web team leader, and under my GitHub account I will publish the slides later on, normally. So, yeah. What is PHPSpec? It's spec-driven development, I would say, but later for more it's based, like many of the PHP tools are based on something else. Like we have, most of you probably know PHP Unit, that is based on JUnit, and so it looks like other communities or other programming languages come up with great ideas a bit upfront PHP. So this one is based on Ruby spec, backdating to 2005. The first PHPSpec implementation was done by Marcel Eduard and Konstantin Kudrayashov, I think. So, but this was 1. something, and the next iteration right now with 2.0 was done by a really large team of, I think, 15 or so, mostly contributors. So the list is growing and growing and growing. So it is for encouraging you to use good design. So no, we are not debating about what good design is in here. That's a bit, that would be filling the whole slot, I think. But interesting, if you choose what for your company or for your project is a good design approach, then you can at least track this down and implement it this way. The whole working is closely related to what you hopefully know when you're doing TDD with PHP Unit or something like it. So you have the same approach of doing it. But it is optimized a bit for describing how you do things and not just the inner workings. So like I just had it is not really TDD, it's BDD, so behavior-driven development. That is quite different. But maybe you know, somebody of you know BHAT for BDD, okay? Oh, okay, good. So it is a bit like BHAT, but in BHAT you write user stories to say what you want to achieve with your stuff. And with spec BDD, you describe how you want to do it. So in combination, both of these are a really powerful tool to achieve the thing that you have this. You don't lose track of the big picture. You describe with BDD, with story BDD like we had, because there you have these whole feature sets, this whole user stories, and if you dive deeper into the specifications on how to achieve those, therefore you need or you can use PHPSpec. But what are the main difference if you compare it to other test tools? Because it's a bit of a thing. Normally, at least as far as I know it, BDD is it's behavior or domain driven at least, and not really test driven, because you don't do the thing you do with unit testing or so on. You don't have really failing tests, but you don't fit your description in this case. But I think, from my point of view, it's mostly a wording issue. If you want to be picky, then it is not testing. If you want to be a bit more open-minded, it's like testing at least. So in this case, we see you can describe the individual classes you use. Like in here, we have a class like it's hello. That's already a specification you can automatically generate with PHPSpec. You can write it down by hand, but mostly it's easier to generate it upfront, and we see later on how it's done easily with the PHP command, with the PHPSpec command line. So in this regard, it is a good custom to use descriptive names, because else you lose one of the main features, that you can have a specification that somebody can read beside the real implementer. In this case, we say it's okay, it's selling hello for greeting, so probably this function we are calling, or this class, should say something as a return. In this case, we said it's the greet function should return hello. That's just the syntax for this. So it is quite easy, and for this we can use it as for designing our architecture, because you can you design up front how you like nowadays you specify something on paper or whatever with UML or something like this, how your APIs interact with each other, and all these specifications could be converted into those PHPSpec stuff, because there you always have, okay, on this request it should return on okay, let's say in error code this or this status. This can be configured in PHPSpec if you write the correct specs, and it has from my opinion, it is a good thing to have this specification as code, because then you can really good version it, ship it with your code, so everybody can see if it's already implementing everything, if not, and so on. It's a bit like, for me it's a bit inspired like the infrastructure as a code approach, because there you describe everything within a versioned system. So with this you design how you want to achieve your user stories. Like I said before, it mimics the magic triangle defined by the TDD approach. We will see, first you should write one failing test, normally. Nothing more, nothing less. And then you should write so much code until you pass this one test. And then rinse and repeat. So we refactor it, or probably you write more and the next failing test to achieve a bigger stockpile of features you need, because mostly if you're only testing one unit, that's not doing so much for your application. So therefore you need more and more and more unit tests, but the real idea is you can improve on it, you can refactor your components and see then hopefully failing tests, because if you refactor it and it's not failing, then maybe your test wasn't really strict enough. And so this is a rinse and repeat cycle you have. And in spec DDD, you have something like you describe a spec, like we've seen before, then you implement it in code to fulfill the spec, and then you improve on it. So in this case, you do nearly the same, but you don't define a test, you define a spec. You write the code for not passing, but for implementing it, so your code can fulfill all these specifications. And then you hopefully can improve your specifications, because maybe you can make them stricter, wider, add more features, but you still have this thing where you know when you change something, either something breaks or your specifications weren't strict enough or explicit enough. Yeah. So for the conclusion, that's nothing I came up with, but for the most part, if you're using unit testing, in this case PHP unit, you really want to do testing on a unit level, on a very small scale level, and because of the possibility to do easier refactoring and so on, you should gain better design, because it's easier to improve in this regard. Normally, as far as I know it, the people write tests. The first quick implementation for passing this test is quick and dirty, mostly, and then you can improve on this, and so you get a better code after testing. And with spec-driven stuff, the design of how, the inner workings of how is the real thing you want to achieve, and having it testable is like a bit of a bonus beside, because if you change something, it breaks, but you see it breaking. Yeah, so we just add another tool. We have so many already out there, not only in the testing regards, but we should use something like mass detection, stakeholder analysis, PHP unit, maybe some functional tests, some integration tests, so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the real improvements for me, I've seen it in applications. To be honest, I don't use it in Magento2. I started after I first tried it with Magento2 and on different other application stuff, because integrating this one into Magento2, I could imagine is a real pain where you sit on. It's not so easy because of the inner magic that is working for bootstrapping the whole class cluster of Magento. And I wouldn't advise using it in older Magento2 projects. So from now on, if you're doing new applications, it's really great if you do it when you start a new feature, a new extension, something like it, because then you can really start it like you do it with TDD from the beginning. You write your specs first, like your tests first. If you have some legacy code or some, not really legacy code, but if you acquire extensions and so on and you want to implement it later on, it gets a bit clumsy because you need to write a whole lot of specifications if you want to cover it all up front, and that's, for me, it feels a bit strange to write all this stuff up front. Maybe for newer features you add, I think it's okay. But it's like with everything else, if you implement it after you're already using the code base, you have to do the choice. You try to pretend you're using it from upfront, or just start from now and hope that you're gaining it, and every refactoring you do on the code base, you can also add with new specifications. Yeah, like I just initially mentioned, to be able to read such specifications, really speaking names is the way to go. Because if you have a function return or whatever, or return result, it's maybe not so easy to see if you have this in 15 classes. For me, it's not that easy to know, and then you have this classes, class 1, 2, 3, with all the same functionality in it. I get kind of distracted and lost in those cases. I started doing, for my colleagues, horribly long function names and class names, but in the end, for me, it has shown it's way easier to maintain, especially if you have to dive into it later on. As I said, I work for a merchant. I'm the poor guy that has to maintain this code in 2 or 3 years, but I don't know anything about it anymore, and probably nobody else does. So naming is not really needed for it, but you see bad name choices or ambiguous name choices up front, because you have to write these on another place than just when you're hacking your codes together. I think it's easier and it's more obvious what you do in this naming regard. Yeah, that's a controversial thing, but it's easier to maintain a decent code quality, because your inner workings, your structure is clear up front. It's separated. You can view it separately from your code base, so you get a better overview over it. And if you define code conventions like how to name stuff and so on, you directly see if it's implemented or not. You don't have to come up with really special PHP CS rules or something like it to get it all done. That is a thing, especially in bigger project where you're not working alone or with 2 or 3 guys, this becomes really handy because everybody can see the impact of it. Yeah, and that's on another slide. You can refactor because you have this defined specifications. You know, you can replace single parts of your application. You can everything that has a spec can be easily replaced because you know what you have to develop against. Because you have the return values, you have everything that is expected testable, or at least automatable testable. In this, for me, that was one of the biggest things. Firstly, I tried PHPSpec, I think, somewhere in early 2016 when I discussed it with James Cowie. He had a talk at Magento about it, and I said, it sounds interesting. Just tried it, and then after half a year or so, I had to completely redo an interface middleware, and I just, by incident, this was the first project I did with PHPSpec, and it was, for me, it was so great to have everything in place. I said, okay, now I can completely remove this interpreter, this XML parser, this one, and just run PHPSpec and see if you're fitting your requirements. This is, to be honest, this was really joyful for me because before it was always a pain to see, yeah, okay, now we changed how the XML parser is working because it was too slow. We refactored it to not as really big spaghetti-like string interpretation. Okay, but is it working correctly still? Is it producing the correct output for the input? It's horrible if you try to import thousands of different XMLs. It's just, yeah, it's only a coincidence if you hit an error or not. So, but here you see, okay, just maybe you covered some edge cases already. You see if it's working or not. It's way easier, especially if you are not the one refactoring your own code. Maybe you still get into it what you've written a year before or so, but especially if somebody without the knowledge of your code or the background knowledge that is not in the code but only in your mind, why you wrote this stuff. And as we all know, the documentation, why we find a special solution is mostly non-documented or at least bad. Because, yeah, you know what you're doing. You only state real clever, non-obvious solutions, and then you have something, you stumble upon your own code and think, oh my gosh, what I have done there? I have no idea why these 2 lines are in there. So, and with this, maybe you don't see why they are in there, but you see in the output, you needed them. And for the integration to Magento, yeah, Magento2 it should be, it's really easy. It's you need PHPSpec with and this bootstrapping extension. I would say it's a thing that covers up the Magento dependency injection stuff for classing and for class names and so on. It's installable from GitHub, so because you can install it by Composer by adding this as a repository in the Composer JSON, and then you need to add 1 or 2 lines to the PHPSpec YAML. But they change from version to version, so I just don't cover it up. Before Magento 2.2, it was PHPSpec 2. something. Because there they used another bootstrap module. The bootstrap module recently, I think last month or roughly, changed the major version from 1 to 2. So nowadays you need at least Magento 2.2, and you need PHPSpec 4. It's better. PHPSpec 4 is way better than 2. It's more descriptive and has more thing to cover. So that's a no-brainer to do it. It's just a thing. If you're not cautious, you have now you have more versions to compare to. Yeah, and so this is a thing like we've seen the hello spec. just at the beginning. This is how you generate these specifications. PHPSpec describe class name. So, and that generates your class name. In the specification for it, then you can add the code in it, and this is also, there are also commands on the command line for generating the expectations and so on. And so there you see, you run it first. Oh, and see, most PHPSpec are run. The class doesn't exist because there is no model for it in Magento. In my installation where I got this from, there was no model because it wasn't created. I only had the spec. And with this Nango bootstrapper, it realizes what class to call and so on. And you see, it doesn't exist. But do you want me to create it for you? Yeah, for me that's a no-brainer. That's nothing can go wrong, hopefully. No, but it creates an empty class, so it's not really a problem. So you don't have any default stuff. Maybe if you try to have something that extends really heavy interface usage, that could be improved. I never tried it to auto-create a complex class that has to implement complex methods or so because of interfaces. I've never seen it, but yeah, maybe it works. I don't know. Just the thing. And then you can, after that, you can verify if your object is working. And in this regard, is the argument for is fake, because you don't have to implement this like we had in the beginning. It is returning hello, let's say. And with if you have this one, if you have this in your spec with fake, you can automatically add a return to the model class we've seen in here to the model class for having a return method for a return that always returns hello, because you're expecting hello as a return. So it can auto-generate the code you need to pass a spec if you have easy enough specs. So if you come up with super complex stuff, I doubt that it will work. But for easier stuff, and as we've seen, the easier you can design your specifications, the easier it is to implement. Maybe you have to do more, but in the end, it's probably easier. So and the conclusion is a thing like fake it, because if you don't need a special implementation, if it always should return, then you can fake it, because then it has only the option to return this value. If you have a deep logic in it, okay, you cannot fake it, but then you need to implement it, so you need to make it. Yeah. And so after that, you would just add another thing to this hello class or specify your next class. So in this case, you can increment the stuff you want to do, the complexity. You can cover up everything if you want to, or I think at least you should specify the stuff that you communicate as API with other modules or something like it. That is, at least from my point of view, that is the least specification you should do, because without it you have a working API, but nothing to refer to where you can develop against as a third-party developer, or if you need to change it, you cannot see what has changed. So this is at least, I think, the minimum amount you should specify. That at least the minimum amount you should do as specification nowadays, even if you do it with pen and paper or so on, because you have no idea what's changing as a third party or API consumer if you don't do it. Yeah. Besides that, there are no really super special things that can happen, but you have your specifications and you can write the code to it, and hopefully in the end, especially if you can combine it with something like Behat, where you write the whole user story, and then you write the specifications to fulfill this user story. Like in the beginning, you see here, Here with PHPSpec, it's how something is achieved with the inner workings, not on a unit level, like with PHP unit or so, because it's completely, for the specification, it's completely nuts how really the inner working is, but if the input and output is correct, it's fulfilling the specification. And so, this comes to an end for me. So just, I don't know, no, I have updated the slides to the thing we have now. Do you have any questions? Sandra?
Didn't you write an integration test like this with PHP?
I think it could be done.
Well, the answer is yes, because I did that.
Okay.
I might have done stuff wrong, so I would like to know what's the benefit of this over PHP unit.
For me, it's the benefit is as you have it also like PHP unit separated from the code, it's easier, for me it's easier readable. The specification itself is easier readable for me. And it, as I've seen it, probably there are things where you can have you don't have to write them directly in PHP code, but you could have at least the stuff defined up front by somebody that is not so proficient, okay, but maybe like project management or an architectural design or something but it's not really profound on the language level, but on the architectural level.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So once you get into power usage,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Any more? So then, thank you for your attention.